Now on Draw, Lose or Draw, we've been joined by special guest Adam Miller, the man who runs Old Firm Facts that you may follow on Twitter. Adam, how are you?
I'm not too bad, thanks. How are you getting on?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks. Thanks very much for joining us. Just want to start by telling us a wee bit about what you do, just in case there's anyone listening who's not familiar with you.
I run a Twitter account I created a few years back called Old Firm Facts. It started off as a thing, just kind of taking the piss out of various things in Scottish football. It was just sort of mainly jokes about Celtic and Rangers, but as it went on, started kind of broadening the horizons of it a little bit and taking in other subjects. And then as it went on and kind of grew, I got an opportunity through that to start writing columns and eventually became a full-time journalist. I worked for a couple of years at the Daily Record in Glasgow Live. Quit that a few months ago. I'm now working for GRV Media, and by the time this podcast comes out, I'll have shared the very first episode of the Old Firm Facts podcast, which I recorded a couple of days ago. So I think that's one of the big things I'm looking to get into with Old Firm Facts.
That's very exciting. I'll ask you to plug your work at the end. Just in terms of writing about Thistle, you obviously cover most of Scottish football, and Thistle does feature quite prominently, and it's mostly because we're not very good at football. But how easy is it to make jokes and write about Thistle?
The thing about Thistle is like a lot of the jokes that I've made at Thistle's expense, they're not necessarily based on any kind of real insight into what's gone wrong at the club tactically. Maybe you can pinpoint names, and particularly when Caldwell was there, for instance, you can make jokes that are specifically related to him. But it's never really been about looking at Thistle's tactics or anything like that and picking that apart. It's always just making sort of daft references, whether it's Kingsley, which is obviously a wealth of material, or just the general perception that people have of Partick Thistle fans. I don't do it so much now, but I used to make quite a lot of jokes around, about sort of Thistle fans hanging out in the West End, discussing the Wes Anderson films and listening to Belle and Sebastian. But basically, those were jokes about my life.
Those sort of stereotypes, how accurate do you think they are? Obviously, you can't paint an entire fan base with the same brush, but do you think they do have a basis?
Well, I know for a fact that I know quite a few Thistle fans, and I know some Thistle fans who are nothing like that, but two of my best pals are a lot like that, and so the jokes are they're a bit about me and a lot about them, and I think they obviously realise that's what it's about. One of them lives down in London now, and I always remember the most kind of Thistle thing that I'd heard was he always talks about one time he came to a Thistle match, and I think he was sort of trying to make the point of this is where the Thistle still have that element of being a football club where fans get angry and shout things, but do it in a very Partick Thistle way. And the chant or the thing that he heard shouted, the guy next to him went, "Come on, Thistle, show some fucking panache."
I'm not going to ask you who you support, but when you do go about Scottish grounds and stuff, what's different about Firhill, and what sort of stands out to you about going to Thistle games compared to other clubs?
Well, I think that Thistle does for us, no matter what league Thistle are in, there's always an atmosphere, and I think and again, I may be sort of playing into a stereotype, but I think there's an almost kind of self-deprecating streak that you need in order to be a Thistle fan, because there's some teams that will go years without any success, and they'll obviously still stick behind their club, but it's a kind of either you're happy or you're sad. And I'm on going on Thistle matches that I've been at, and more specifically the people that I know who support Thistle, there tends to be an atmosphere or a mindset where you can find the humour in even a terrible result. And even a terrible season, as long as you're avoiding relegation, you can still see not necessarily the funny side of it, but you can be a bit reflective about it. I think the way sometimes Thistle fans, again, I'm basing this on people I know, but I think sometimes the way Thistle fans talk about the team is like a sitcom character, like the way the rest of the cast of Friends would talk about something like they love him and they're sort of strangely proud of him, but they're also resigned to making a series of hilarious mishaps. So essentially, Partick Thistle are the Joey Tribbiani of Scottish football.
I think you're pretty spot on. There's obviously an element of the support that think we're a Premiership club and do take it really seriously, and it's not to say the rest of us don't take it seriously, but it is that sort of self-deprecating humour that I think you've got to have to support a team that's as unsuccessful as we are. In terms of like your interactions with Thistle fans online, partly just for your own amusement and partly through like things you do for your work, what do you take away from there?
But I mean, the majority of interactions that I have with people on Twitter, for all that I'll always talk about the kind of fan posts that I get on my notifications, most people enjoy it and play into it, and there's quite a few Partick Thistle fans that follow me, which is great. And I've got to know a few of them a little bit through Twitter. But I always, when I get asked about like the kind of abuse you get or the criticism, Rangers, Celtic and Partick Thistle are the three examples that I give, because Rangers fans are this sort of give you this sort of short, sharp criticism where if they don't like it, it's just you're a dick, basically. If Celtic fans don't like it, then it's you're part of some kind of MSM conspiracy against their team. And if Thistle fans don't like it, then it's a dissertation about why this reference was slightly wide of the mark, and you, sir, should be taking time to ponder whether or not this is an acceptable display of blah blah. And I've had ones that are just like people taking it down. And again, I don't make these jokes so much now because I kind of kick the arse out of it. But when I used to make all those jokes all the time about Wes Anderson and Belfast, whatever, you would get Thistle fans sometimes who would respond without any sort of self-awareness about it, who would get really pissed off about it, but their anger would still be really eloquent and articulate, and I'd be like, you're kind of proving the point here, just call me an arsehole.
But before I ask you to plug your work, we've got a new feature on the show which we've inventively called Partridge Thistle, where we ask like an Alan Partridge type question. Last week it was how many bites does it take you to finish a cream egg? Do you have any thoughts on that topic?
How many bites does it take you to finish a cream egg?
Yeah.
That's a good question. We're talking like the small cream eggs here.
Just the regular size. Regular size. 4, really? Do you go like the thin end first, or do you bite right into the bottom fat end first?
I think you've just got to kind of abandon all dignity when you head in there. Like there's no messing about. It's straight in from the first whistle.
We've not actually decided what this week's topic's going to be, but I saw somebody replied to your tweet saying that you were coming on here with, if Buzz Lightyear believes he's not a toy, why does he like drop dead when adults come in the room? So I think we might run with that this week. Do you have any thoughts on Buzz Lightyear's strange behaviour there?
Just like any mention of that, I just get like post-traumatic stress disorder thinking about the end of Toy Story 3. It's just going to set me off. I think that's a really good question. That I don't know if it's like learned behaviour from hanging around with Woody.
I think probably in the back of his mind, he probably knows deep down he's a toy, and he's probably just doing it to protect Woody. But it does raise an important point about like the validity of the Toy Story movies. And
so what you're saying essentially is that they should all be scrapped and cancelled.
Yeah, I'm not the person that would write the dissertation on this, but I know the Thistle fans that could do it. Just before we go, do you want to sort of plug your work? And obviously you mentioned the podcast there, where we can find it.
So on Wednesday night, I put out the very first episode of the Old Fun Facts podcast, which I've recorded in association with the big light who make podcasts like Sean McDonald's Blethered and Talk Media with Stuart Cosgrove, Name and the Neil, and a whole bunch of other interesting podcasts. It's the first episode's got Sean McDonald and Stuart Cosgrove as the guests. It was supposed to be about 45 minutes and it's run to about an hour and a half because it was such an interesting conversation. We talked about all kinds of stuff related to Scottish football. Nothing's off the table. Some of it's funny, some of it's serious. I've got big ambitions for this thing. I'm going to really involve the Scottish football fans and people that follow me on Twitter and everything like that. I want it to be a kind of collaborative thing that people can feel involved in. And that's going to be something we're going to put episode out, see how that goes in terms of the response, and hopefully it can build from there. And in terms of the day job, I'm writing for GRB Media across a number of their websites, so I'll be, whenever there's an idea for a column, whether it's a kind of jokey, old fun factsy column or a more serious hour type column, I'll be putting those out. So I'll be doing plenty of writing and hopefully plenty of podcasting.
All the best with the podcast. I hope it goes really well, and thanks very much.
And with this one, thanks for having me on.
No, thanks very much for your time. Really appreciate it. Cheers.
Nice one. Cheers.
Thank you.